So we are made up of all sorts of different personas and ways of being, but underneath all of that, there's this pure consciousness that just is. And I experience it right now as a radiant field of kind of shimmering bliss bubbles. So go looking for that and do whatever you need to do in life to find that, because that will be your homing place. And gradually you won't want to live anyplace else.
Gay and Katie Hendricks are renowned authors and teachers on relationships, body intelligence, and personal growth. They've published over 50 books and taught in countries all over the world to help others enhance their creativity, intimacy, and joy. In this conversation, we discuss the art of conscious loving and how to use your relationship as a conduit for spiritual growth and creativity.
Taking responsibility is, we call it a celebration, because instead of thinking of it as blame or a burden, I got to take responsibility for this. Instead, you're stepping into a place of absolute creation where you say, how did I create this particular situation? How did I end up in a marriage with an alcoholic? How could that have happened? What could I have done that created that? So the moment you step into that full position of creativity, you step out of the victim position and you step into unity with the universe itself. Because if we think of ourselves as separate from the universe will kick our butts all over the lawn until we get the message.
Gay and Katie believe that the intelligence of the universe orchestrates situations for your growth and alignment.
There's a great old saying by Frank Zappa, the musician. He said, in the war between you and the universe, bet on the universe. Because if you're out of phase inside yourself with your life purpose, the universe, the life around you, is going to give you feedback on that.
Gay and Katie share a number of questions you can ask to begin to use your relationship to understand unconscious patterns and programs. This is a transformational pathway that can move you closer towards true freedom.
And I found one of the most valuable questions was to ask, how is this familiar? Because it's something that we learned. Relationship patterns that are problematic, generally, we didn't just make them up, we inherited them. We learned them from our family or from the social environment, the culture that we grew up, or from now from social media. And so if I begin to recognize, I learned this pattern, then I can learn something new. And to experience taking responsibility, for me, when I'm taking genuine responsibility, it actually brings a burst of joy.
Before we get into this conversation, I want to ask you to join this amazing community of consciousness explorers. This whole idea of pursuing expanded consciousness and the boundaries of human potential while living a modern life is relatively new, which is why we interview revered masters, teachers, experts, and practitioners to help you on your own journey. To stay up to date on the latest conversations, simply click subscribe below and you'll be notified each time a new episode comes out. I am so grateful for all of your support and comments. I love reading them. Now let's dive into this conversation. Hey, Gay and Katie, great to see you.
Great to see you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for inviting us aboard today.
Absolutely. And I thought it might be fun to just kick things off with a story, because you guys have so many good stories. Gay, maybe you could talk about your first pickup line for when you saw Katie across the room.
Yes. Well, what happened was the story actually really started a month before I met Katie, because I had this realization of how I'd messed up every relationship I'd ever been in. I was 34, I think, at the time I had this realization, and I'd had any number of relationships, from my first love in my teen years to, kind of a disaster short marriage. And anyway, I'd been in every sort of different kind of relationship, but none of them had ever worked. And some lasted 6 months and some lasted a couple of years, but nothing ever really lasted in the long term way. So I put a lot of attention into why is this? For a long time, I thought it was the women's problem. That
Gotta be.
it got to be the woman's problem, right?
Totally their fault.
Absolutely.
And
We
so
can all agree.
finally, I came to my senses. And on one magic day, when I was 34 years old, I actually sat down and I just decided to sit there until I figured out what I did wrong in every relationship to mess it up. And I came up basically with only three things. I didn't tell the truth. So that was a big one.
Mhm.
I would, somebody would ask me, like a woman would ask me, what are you feeling right now? And I would say, I don't know.
Mhm.
Or why do you want to know
What's it
something
to
like
you?
that? Or, yeah. So whatever defensive move I made, it was never about just telling the person what I was feeling
Mhm.
inside, which is, an astonishingly simple thing, but most of us take a while to learn it. So anyway, on this magic day, I realized, okay, what I could do instead is just make a commitment to and tell the truth all the time. And so I made a commitment to doing that. I just was sitting there and I said, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to change my life in that regard. Instead of concealing, I'm going to be all about revealing. So that was number one. Number two, I realized that this really insidious habit I had, which ruined relationships, which lots of other people had too, I had noticed, was when I would get under stress, I would go into a victim position and blame the other person. And usually the other person doesn't take that. They
Like,
will go into the victim position themselves and then blame me. But I never saw this pattern before. On this one magic day, I realized, oh, what I could do instead of blaming, is simply take responsibility for whatever has come up and just not even try to pretend it's anybody else's fault. I'll just say, okay, for whatever reason, I dreamed it up myself. So that was a huge realization that I could end blame and criticism by this kind of radical act of responsibility. So I'm still sitting on the floor there. And I came up with number three. I wrote all this down on yellow pads, by the way. That was my way of brain dumping at the time, Bic pens and yellow pads. And I came up with a third thing that had messed up a number of relationships. I'm a creative person. I sit down and write every day, and I sit down and think every day. And so my particular mode of expression happens to be a lot through writing and publishing books and things like that. And so that's in my genius zone. But the deeper issues is that I'm a very creative person, as many people are, and I hadn't learned yet how to keep my creativity online all the time, because I would have a wave of creativity and then I'd get lost in some kind of relationship drama, not with Katie, but with other relationships. And I would sacrifice my creativity for the relationship. Boy, I realized
Yeah.
that's a lethal problem. There's that great old saying from the Gospel of Thomas that says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you. And I was well on my way to destruction. And so I decided to make a commitment, a really radical commitment, to telling the truth all the time, taking full responsibility, even in situations where it looked like it was the other person's fault. And number three, really committing to my creativity and being unwavering about that, and making it clear in any relationship I was in that was a value of mine. And so it was no big deal anymore. Okay, so that's what I wanted. I came up with these three things. And then here's what I did that I think really made it happen. I call it cracking the whip on the universe. I said to nobody, because there was nobody there, I said, I promise you this. I'm okay with being alone. If this doesn't work out for me, I'm fine by myself. I have a good life on my own. However, if I get into another relationship, I only want a relationship where those three things are absolutely celebrated. Okay. I don't want any ifs, ands, or buts about that. And if that's not going to happen, I'm happy to be alone. Boom. 1 month later, I walk into a room and there's about 50 or 60 people there, and I'm to give a lecture to this group of people. And I'd written a couple of books by then, and they had invited me to come to a graduate school where Katie was one of the teachers, but was also working off. I mean, she was getting her doctorate there, but she was also teaching the movement therapy classes there because that was her specialty. So I didn't know any of this at the time, but so when I stepped into this room, one of my customs when I'm giving a talk is I look around the room and I kind of look at it as energy phenomena. Where are the energy hot spots? Kind of where's somebody that doesn't want to be there, but their spouse brought them, and just to, because I've been in 70 different countries and given talks all over the place. So I want to make sure what I'm saying is going to get across. And as I scanned the room, there was this one woman who was just, she radiated beautiful, loving energy. And I thought, gosh, whatever she's doing, I just want to honor her. And I did in that moment. I kind of bowed to her. And then I went on and I looked around the room. And anyway, so as I started talking, though, it really became clear because she laughed at everything I said that was funny. And I highly recommend if you're in the mate finding world, get somebody that likes your sense of humor, okay? And,
Very important.
And if you don't have a sense of humor, get somebody that doesn't.
I would have to agree with this one.
So my great pickup line, we'll compress the story a little bit in the interest of time, but you can get it all in.
Oh yeah, in one of our books. I forget which one, but we tell the story.
I think it's in The Conscious Heart. Maybe.
I think it maybe is in The Conscious Heart, but I just want to insert here a little bit of when Gay was looking around the circle, I could see that he was looking at people's energy. And I found that very, very interesting. And I knew how to do that, but I'd never seen anybody doing it. So I was observing him, observing people. And then he came past, he went past me and then he came back. And we had this sort of timeless recognition. We recognized each other. And it was something that we unpacked for about 6 months, everything that happened in that moment of, like he could see that I could see that he could see. And then, and then when he opened his mouth, I thought, this is the smartest, funniest person I've ever met. And I still have a little notebook because I was also using a fountain pen. And I have a notebook of that weekend of my notes about what happened. And I still have that. So when I went up to ask him a question at the break, and I didn't even get the question out of my mouth, and I still can't remember what it was because you said.
I said, I feel very attracted to you.
That was
number one.
That was number one. And then I kind of went,
Because all I knew about it was a name tag, And so I said, I'd like to ask you out for a cup of coffee. But first, I have to tell you something really important. I've recently come to a new way of being in relationship where I want to only be in relationships where both people are absolutely committed to telling the truth. Both people are committed to taking responsibility for things that come up rather than blaming the other person. And both people are totally committed, unshakably committed to their own creative path in addition to wanting a path of unity in a relationship. On those terms, would you like to have coffee with me?
So it took me about 15 seconds because here's what I heard. I heard, listen, I don't care what you're doing right now. I'd like you to just drop it all. And I'd like you to come to Colorado and have this transformational journey with me. I can't guarantee you what's going to happen, but this is what I'd really like. So what do you think? And so it took me about 15 seconds. So I came back with, how about lunch?
So she
So
took it from coffee to lunch. So,
upped
Nice
the ante a little
compromise.
bit. And
Well,
and one thing we had for lunch was some deviled eggs.
yes,
Yeah, and
yeah.
Katie, and this was from a store, but Katie still makes the best deviled eggs I've ever tasted in my life. 44 years later.
well, wow, what an amazing way to start this beautiful union that you guys have. And I'd love to double click on one of the things that you mentioned there, which is that notion of taking 100% responsibility for your reactions. I was actually just having talking to a friend about this who's going through some relational difficulty, and there was this question around, how do I know when this difficulty is my own work and my own lesson and my own pattern versus this person just isn't the right person for me?
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's a
You
great
wouldn't
question.
believe how many times we've been asked that question in different cultures. You know, it doesn't
Mm.
matter if we're in Brooklyn or Bombay. It's the same, often the same set of three or four questions people ask. Another one is, how do I know when it's time to leave?
Mhm.
Mm.
That's a big question that many people stew in. But let me get to the first one, and let's noodle with that one a second. Um, well, first of all, did you have a thought about that?
Well, the first thing that occurs to me about taking 100% responsibility is the very first move is to go, how am I allowing this or creating it or enabling it in some way? And so I, first of all, get curious, not blaming myself. So taking responsibility is not about either blame or burden, which most people confuse it with. So, like, oh, okay, it's my fault. And so I'll take it on as a burden, or it's your fault. When someone says, who's responsible for this mess, they usually want to know who can they blame rather than who
Mm.
can actually respond to this in a creative way. And so that making that choice of, okay, there's some way in which I'm interacting with this and I'm going to get curious about it. And then the pattern can emerge more easily rather than I'm going to figure out how come it's your fault.
So, taking responsibility is, we call it a celebration because instead of thinking of it as blame or a burden, oh, I got to take
Mhm.
responsibility for this. Instead, you're stepping into a place of absolute creation where you say,
Mhm.
how did I create this particular situation? How did I end up in a marriage with an alcoholic? How could that have happened? What could I have done that created that?
Mhm.
So the moment you step into that full position of creativity, you step out of the victim position and you step into unity with the universe itself. Because if we think of ourselves as separate
Mhm.
from the universe will kick our butts all over the lawn until we get the message. Because it's not about separation, it's about unity with your feelings, with the world around you, with your mate, with politics. It's coming into union with that and then finding particular ways to relate to those set of relationships. But everything in the universe is about relationship. I
Mhm.
mean, we are all made of the same thing, and the universe is our relations with each other. And that means that each one of us at any given moment is able to transcend our particular history and rise in the
Mhm.
moment
Mhm.
to fully appreciating yourself as a mind, body, spirit being, and also
Mhm.
seeing your partner as a mind, body, spirit being. You can only see as much over here
Mhm.
as you've experienced over here. You can only love as much over here with the other person as you've loved inside yourself.
That's beautiful. So I guess, you know, it sounds like whether that person, for the people that are out there that are going through this with their relationships and uncertain whether it's the right thing or not, if they just focus on what you described of that curiosity and asking those questions, eventually the answer will reveal itself.
Oh, and you'll be able, it may not be like just immediately comes to you, but you'll be able to start seeing it in your lived experience. And I found one of the most valuable questions was to ask, how is this familiar? So, and because it's something that we learned, relationship patterns that are problematic, generally, we didn't just make them up, we inherited them. We learned them from our family or from the social environment, the culture that we grew up, or from now from social media. And so if I begin to recognize, oh, I learned this pattern, then I can learn something new. And to experience taking responsibility, for me, when I'm taking genuine responsibility, it actually brings a burst of joy. And that's how I know I've reclaimed my creativity, because we're always responsible, but most of it is we're unconsciously acting out of blame or burden, or being on the triangle of the hero, victim, or the villain. And so when I get curious, which is something you don't have to wait for somebody else to give to you, you can generate curiosity in every moment, and that breaks you free of the repetitive learned patterns.
One thing that strikes me is you guys have written about, and I believe this was in Conscious Loving, how we actually tend to attract people in that help us start to become aware of these for the purpose of our own evolution and awareness. And I would love for you to share more on your experience of what you've seen with that.
Yeah, let me give you a great example from one of my first relationships. See, a lot of us, and I think I was one of them, when we take on a relationship, see the other person as a reluctant improvement project.
Yeah.
That we're always trying to get them to change, and they're not doing it to our satisfaction. But both people are doing that to each other. In one of my early relationships, the person I was with was always getting angry about things. And once she got mad at a telephone that she was on and beat it on the wall until it had to, people had to come fix it and everything. And
they used to have telephones on walls.
Yeah, remember those? You're probably too young to remember that. But they used to be attached to the wall and could be beaten to death easily. Now you just throw it in the ocean if you don't like your phone. But anyway, I was always complaining about her anger. Then on one magic day, I realized, oh, what if I am so intellectual and out of touch with my feelings that I require that kind of approach, that I require her to be that way? And that was a real moment of awakening for me, because I realized, oh, the way I am inside attracts the behavior of a particular type of person.
Yeah.
Well, what happened, interestingly enough, almost, within weeks after I had that realization and started practicing it, in other words, I took the attention off of criticizing her for her anger and just put it on, maybe it has something to do with my own anger. Maybe I'm so out of touch with that in myself that I require. It's just like if I were frozen, I would require a person with a blowtorch, to thaw me out. If I were moderately thawed out, I would require a person with a blanket, but I would still be needing something from the outside world. Well, in taking responsibility for it, it ends that situation, because most of the time you realize, as I did, that I had created one relationship after another where I had some version of that complaint, that the person was my improvement project. That was my thinking, instead of focusing on improving myself. It was a joke for me at age 22 to think of me trying to improve anybody else. I mean, I smoked heavily. I smoked 2 or 3 packs of Marlboro. I was fat. I was, I wore big, thick glasses and had a crummy job. I wasn't the beautiful person I am today. It's taken 44 years of refinement to turn this lump of coal into a diamond.
Well done.
I hope you're enjoying this conversation so far. If you like what you hear, let me know by clicking like, subscribing to the channel, and responding with a comment around something that you found interesting in the conversation so far. In addition to these videos, I do a lot of writing on the exploration of consciousness and my own personal revelations in my newsletter called Consciousness: The Doorway to Human Evolution. To receive these updates and more, all you need to do is simply head to the link in the description below and you'll be added to the community of 20,000 plus consciousness explorers receiving weekly ideas and inspiration in their inbox. I look forward to hearing from you there. Now let's get back to the show. Well, I think you're doing a pretty good job. And one of the questions that I think comes up for a lot of people, and I have a very similar experience, by the way, where the outside tends to mirror the inside. And as the inside changes, the outside evolves as well. I think one of the challenges is so much of this is unconscious. And so, we don't even know about these patterns and we don't even know about these underlying things that we're attracting. And I know earlier you mentioned curiosity as one way to basically have a gateway into understanding the underlying things. Is that the primary means? Is there other things that you found really effective for identifying like how we're in some ways self-sabotaging or bringing in things that aren't actually what we desire?
Yes, there are several things that you can do, but one thing to generate curiosity, which is now we've been doing it for years, and now it's supported by research, is to create hmm, a,
Wonder.
a pleasant which shifts you out of your critical brain into your wonder brain. And so if you and people who are listening can try this out. If you're in the middle of humming, you cannot criticize yourself. Go ahead and try it. And so it gives you a pattern interrupt of that habit of criticizing yourself or others. And then that opening up to, hmm, that what is generating this. And also I found it a question that's really valuable is, how am I experiencing this in my body? Because most of us who live, a lot of people live from their neck up and are try to uh, create a new story from a brain that's just circulating old stories. And so one of the things I ask people often is, what story are you making up about your partner? And I found that's really valuable for people to just begin to identify, the story I'm making up about you right now is that you're really a slob, and or whatever the story is, or that you don't help me, or that you're more popular than me, whatever the story is. Then I can start to explore, how is this familiar? Where did I learn about this particular story? And we can do various kinds of things in our consciousness to shift out of that space of being contained in that old story. And one of them is breathing. Another one is moving in a new way. Another one is encountering your fear and melting your fear through your body. So a lot of our work is really about enabling people to shift states by choice.
And mentioning the somatic part of it is important, the body part of it, because anytime, excuse me, anytime you feel yourself stressed or in the middle of a relationship conflict or depressed or unhappy about the state of things, you may have other feelings. You may be angry, you may be sad, but one thing you're for sure is you're scared. And so, if you want to be a transformational athlete, like I'd like to invite everybody to be, get good at being with fear. Get a good conversation with what you're scared about. Because, like, if you're in the middle of a relationship conflict and you've got the finger pointed and blame at the other person, why do you keep doing da da da? My life would be so much better if you didn't do da 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 every week. And so, in that moment, you're scared and you're making up a story that this other person is the reason you're scared. But that doesn't hold up much water, because most of the time, if you think about it for a moment, you realize that you've got a theme in your relationships. Isn't it odd that I kept running up against angry women until I learned how to handle my own anger? And then it ceased to be a problem. I haven't had a problem in 50 years, but it used to be a constant problem dealing with women's anger. But it was just there as a placeholder for me to keep reminding myself to, get in touch with that. Use what's happening in the relationship as a learning experience instead of a blaming experience. And to this day, I mean, that really saves the day in relationships when we have people here, that by the time a person gets here and is willing to, not to be crass about it, but to pay our kind of prices, they have exhausted a lot of other possibilities. They've tried to fix their relationship in other ways. So they're often bringing us a problem. If they've been married 30 years, they're bringing us a 29-and-a-half-year-old problem that has never been solved in the whole 30 years. What happens, though, is when a person takes themselves out of the victim position and says, why would I create a relationship with a person who drinks too much and inconveniences me and the kids with his drinking? Why would I create that kind of a situation? I realize, suddenly the person realized, that's how they grew up.
That's what they saw.
That's what they saw.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's amazing to me. I mean, it's one of the main puzzlements of my life is how we can be so oblivious to the obvious reason we're suffering in such a way, because all it takes is about 1/10 of a second of genuine wondering about it.
But it's really like fish in water. If that's all to really remove yourself from that context, really, takes a out of yourself experience. And for many people, if they go out of their head and into their whole body experience, that provides a gateway to exploration and also to be able to take charge of their lives, to have some agency about their choices. And I've spent a lot of time creating a module for people to learn how to befriend their fear. And on our Foundation for Conscious Loving website, there's a whole section that's called Unlocking the Fear Code. And it's got a whole bunch of activities, including fear melters and different ways to recognize I'm not mad at you, I'm scared. And I find that shift is one of the most valuable ones in any kind of relationship, is that it looks like it's your fault. Oh, I'm scared. Because those 4 expressions of fear, of fight and flee and freeze and faint, always show up when we're stuck in some way or another. And when people begin to loosen the grip of fear, they can begin to see more readily, I'm creating this story over and over again. And I can love myself for doing that. I can honor that. But then, oh man, so much more fun to create a new story, of appreciating rather than criticizing, and, focusing on my creativity rather than trying to control yours, and, new stories about co-creating.
I love that. And I think there's this interesting interplay between some of the other concepts that you mentioned, specifically being truthful and fear, which I know a lot of people listening go, well, if I was truthful, if I told my partner that I thought somebody else was attractive, all hell would break loose. And then the other is the other side of that is creativity. And what happens to creativity based on how your relationship with fear and truth. And so I would love to explore those topics as well, and how truth and creativity are related to this.
One thing I wanted to just share with you right off is that we actually did share about that in the first years of our relationship. We would, I got to the place where we'd be walking down the street and, I'd see this woman and I'd say to Gabe, yeah, she's, nice boobs, or she's really attractive. So being willing to receive the truth is just as important. Are you a safe space for someone to say what's really going on, what they're experiencing? And both of those can contribute to that the truth sets you free, because our culture does not support telling the truth.
Well, also family life often doesn't either. Families are often built around not telling the truth. I happened to grow up in one. And
me too.
Yeah. And so it was organized around making sure the truth never got said. And I see now, because I grew up next to my grandparents, it was the same way in their
in their
relationship
yeah,
too. So it
right.
gets passed down from generation to generation. Fortunately, many of us are waking up now and kind of wanting to have different conscious ways of going about the things that I'm 79 now. I'm about to turn 80, and nobody in my family has ever had a healthy relationship, throughout their whole lives. I'm going to be number one.
Yeah,
This
you're
is
starting a new
I'm starting a
family tradition.
family, and also to be able. My brother and I often joke that we were going to be the first members of our lineage to ever die from something other than an addiction of some kind, either alcohol or
Wow.
particularly cigarettes. In my uh, immediate family, most of them.
I'd say also in when we're speaking in public, throughout, because we used to do a lot of television back in the 90s and conferences, that when we would start talking about telling the truth, there would be this huge uproar that would arise. Like people just could not believe that that was a good idea. And in fact, I think in one TV audience, there was someone who stood up and she said, I've been lying to my husband every day for 29 years in our relationship, and it saved our relationship. And everybody in the audience goes, this support of it's better to conceal than it is to reveal. And I think it's a major issue in our, in our society right now, because we have half of the population lives in a different reality than the other. And that's all based in, are you willing to see and tell the truth, what's actually real in front of you? And I just find that incredible. I never thought I would see the Emperor's New Clothes come to life. I read it as a kid, but now we're living in it.
Well, it definitely strikes me as something that people perceive as safer, which comes back to the fear piece. And I think what I've also heard you guys talk about, though, is though it may appear safer, it actually does, holding these lies, not telling the truth, it does siphon your creativity. It does siphon your life force. And it's kind of a quiet drain where the pain and cost may not be as obvious.
Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind at all times because, really human beings, when we're fairly simple in a way, but we can make our lives incredibly complicated by those things. Like if there's something you're not telling the truth about, that can proliferate into all sorts of areas of your life. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be just saying, I'm angry, or I feel sad, or I'm scared, or I feel sexual. Whatever the thing is, it's usually about 10 seconds worth of
Right.
words. And yet people will go to great lengths to organize their lives around protecting. We had a man, this is really epic. When we got to him, he'd already had something like 175 massages to
Right.
try to deal with his back pain. The back pain had been going on for several years. He'd had, what was the other thing?
It's
Massage, but
chiropractic,
oh yeah,
and he
chiropractic.
was
Exactly.
about to get surgery on his back.
Yeah, where they fused the vertebrae of the spine. So that was going to be his next move because nobody had been able to fix his back pain. But our cure is the 10-second cure. And the 10-second cure goes like this. What was it that you started lying about 3 years ago when you started having back pain?
And
10 seconds. Okay. And what it was about in his case was that was about the time he started taking every Tuesday lunch off and having sex with his secretary. And pretty soon, Tuesday lunch just didn't quite do it. So it had to be Thursday afternoon too. And so pretty soon that went, and then his back pain set in. So he's either out of integrity causing the back pain or trying to get the back pain fixed. The source is always a 10-second solution, and it goes like this. I'm him, this is my wife. For the last 3 years, I've been having sex on Tuesday at lunch and on Thursday afternoon with Madeline. You know Madeline, my secretary of 25 years. And this would not usually be the reaction.
Taking it quite well, Katie.
Quite well.
If you do it really well, you'll get a good
You
laugh.
must have
out
done
of
your
it.
work.
That's how you can tell. But most times the person will start bouncing up and down.
Yeah, there will be a big uproar. But in this case, she had gained about 30 pounds.
The wife.
In this situation. And once there was a flurry of, and all of the feelings and all of that, but it didn't actually last very long, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then we unwound all of the different things and they went back home again. And over the next month, that weight for her dropped away.
It's like 30 pounds in 30 days without dieting.
She didn't diet. So she had been in some way supporting the untruthfulness, because there's no way in a close relationship when someone has their attention going elsewhere that you don't register that in some way or another.
Yeah. So she had been registering it unconsciously and trying to make it go away with food. But it never works that way until you get to the core of what it is you've been resisting seeing or resisting knowing. I remember there used to be a bumper sticker in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I first saw it. It said on the back of the car, "What are you pretending not to know?" I thought that was the 1960s for you. You could see things like that.
Things like that on cars. But I think, one thing I like to invite people to do is when you're looking at dramas like on, television or on social media, the drama is always about some kind of a lie. And you can see it, and it goes way back in, if you look at Shakespeare's, for example, Romeo and Juliet, that whole tragedy was about lying, about people lying. And so the moment that you get a sense of, oh, it's the withholding. In fact, in Conscious Loving, we had this little phrase that became really famous. We call it withhold, withdraw, project. And so human beings are meant to express. We have something go on and we're meant to express that. And then it clears up and we go on and feeling alive and, in our ability to choose and interact. But when you withhold, you have to use measurable physical energy in order to keep yourself from expressing. And then you get distant and then your partner looks different. And so whenever there's a projection, I invite people to look at, okay, what did I withhold? And it's not the thing, it's the act of withholding. And I think that's true in business. It's true with friends and with colleagues, as well as romantic relationships. And just that little sort of formula has really enabled a lot of people to go, oh, I thought especially if you're starting to feel kind of flat or, you're not very interesting anymore. That's a signal that there's been some kind of a withhold that's going on.
Also, the second principle about taking responsibility is really important here too, because the moment you slip into the victim position and start pretending the world is doing it to you, or your mate is doing it to you, or at work, your partners, there's a great old saying by Frank Zappa, the musician. He said, "In the war between you and the universe, bet on the universe." Because if you're out of phase inside yourself with your life purpose, the universe, the life around you is going to give you feedback on that. So the moment you start sliding into the victim position and saying, you're to blame, next thing you got to have is more support for that victim position. And next thing you know, you're sitting down at the end of the bar, with a bunch of other guys, and you're saying, "Women, huh? Yeah, don't get me started. If it weren't for women, I wouldn't be here." As a matter of fact,
that's very true. If it weren't for women, you wouldn't be here.
There was a study done some years ago in the California prison system, and they simply asked this one question of the prisoners. I think there was about 20,000, so it was a lot of them. They asked them the question, "Why are you here? Why do you think you're here?" And they got the most astonishing range of answers. In fact, only a tiny percentage of them said it had anything to do with them. I'm here because I
Wow.
stuck up a bank and got caught. But the big thing they blamed was their partners. I wouldn't be here unless she had not squealed on me,
Yeah,
or
right.
she wouldn't stand up for me. She
Right.
wouldn't
She
say
put
I
the
would,
money in the wrong place.
or
Yeah.
she wouldn't say I was there all night. And so I think it was like 25%. Astonishingly enough, more of them blamed their own lawyers than blamed the people that actually prosecuted them. Uh, so there was like 20% of them that said, I'm here because I had bad lawyering. But interestingly enough, I mean, that's an extreme example because ultimately, if you keep not taking responsibility, you'll find yourself in increasingly confined situations like ultimately a cell. And so, but it applies to real life because at every moment you're either in a position of ownership of your responsibility and you're asking yourself, why did I create that particular issue? And
Mhm.
you genuinely work with that until you get an answer. And sometimes the answer is there 10 seconds. The answer is,
Mm.
why don't I get along with Bob? Oh, he's just like my Uncle Fred,
Mhm.
and sometimes the awareness is
Mhm.
just that quickly. Sometimes you have to be with it a while. But the key thing is that moment of ownership. That has cosmic
Mhm.
potential because the moment you say, why did I create it that way? Or why do I need this particular situation? You step into the creative position there rather than the victim position. And when you do that, you're right in harmony with the rest of the universe, which is busily creating magic all the time. It's us humans that would kind of get separate from the flow of the universe and then make ourselves very miserable.
And a question I have for you on that is as we realize our own creation in some form, you know, what is the path to authorship? If I brought in a friend who's like my Uncle Billy, who's an asshole, and I'm like, oh, okay, I brought in Uncle Billy. What's next? Is there a conscious authorship that can occur, and how does that work?
Yes, it's, what is it with Uncle, whatever his name was? I can't remember now. Bill. Was it Uncle Bill? Uh, but
That's right.
what is it about Uncle, whatever, that triggers me?
Uh,
Oh, that's interesting. He used to bounce me on his lap in a particularly weird way when I
mhm.
was little, and I didn't like it, but I couldn't get away from it either. Um, so those kind of awarenesses is what comes up when you ask that question in a kind of a legitimate. You have to ask it in a
Mhm.
genuinely curious
Mhm.
way. If you
It's
ask
really
it
key.
in antagonistically, like,
Or defensively.
yeah, why did that SOB do that to me? You never get any good answers that way because I don't know if you've ever driven in a fog or not, but you have to use your low beams in a fog because if you kick your high beams on, you just see more fog. And unfortunately, our late friend and colleague Wayne Dyer used to say, unfortunately, that human beings, when we are doing something that isn't working, one of the solutions we come up with was let's do more and more of what already isn't working. and so, a lot of times, the best thing to do if you catch yourself in that mode is get very somatic. Come on, I'm
Mhm.
scared right now. What am I scared about? How did I set things up in this particular way? And those questions get
Mhm.
answers very quickly. The great poet E. Cummings said, "It's always the beautiful question that
Mhm.
gets the beautiful answer."
Mm. And a couple of things are occurring to me also that have been really valuable in my own journey and in working with others. The genuine question of what do you really want? What do you really want is something that we ask each other, in various ways all the time, and actually, where do I know what I want? How do I know what I really want? That's a genuinely valuable question, and distinguishing what you might call impulse, something that arises from within you and wants to be expressed, from reacting, to try to fit in or to stoke your ego or to compete with other people. Those are all outer directed and reactive. But the whole, what is it that's coming up from within me that I want to express, that I find is an ongoing question that you can ask throughout life. And most of us get our wanting muscles completely atrophied, even by the time we get into school, because people say things like, oh, you don't want that, or that's not good for you, or what about the starving kids, and they can't have it, so you can't have it, and all kinds of delegitimizing the value of I want, because it's that reaching out. In fact, that's how we first start turning from babies, into toddlers and then into functioning humans, is by reaching out for something that we want and bringing it in. And so that whole action of wanting and the impulse to create is something that we can cultivate.
That's wonderful. And a distinction and question I have is I've heard you guys talk about this notion of essence, right? And I remember, Gay, hearing your story about coming in contact with just the pure consciousness. And so, how do we distinguish the wants that arise from the essence versus the wants that arise from our patterns that might actually not be serving us and might just be a function of conditioning?
Well, first of all, um, the feeling of essence is one that I really encourage people to take on as a somatic
Mhm.
experience rather than just thinking about it. Like, for example, right now, if you're listening or viewing this, tune into who am I really? Like underneath all my story and stories, underneath all of my past, underneath all of my yearnings for the future, underneath everything, who am I? And as you wonder about that, it's what's going to happen is you'll come across layer after layer after layer of yourself. In a way, you are your ego because there's a part of you that wants to succeed in the world. And in another way, you are your artist, the person that wants to do things that light you up creatively. So we are made up of all sorts of different personas and ways of being, but underneath all of that, there's this pure consciousness that just is.
Mhm.
And I experience it right now as a radiant field of kind of shimmering bliss bubbles. That'd be the
Sounds
best
nice.
description of it. So go looking for that and do whatever you need to do in life to find that, because that will be your homing place. And gradually you won't want to live anyplace else. But that moment um, of unfolding and unpeeling, you get little bursts of it. You don't have to go all the way down through all your layers of programming. The act of just wondering about it brings it forth a little bit. Just like when you're on a journey as a kid and I don't know if you ever played this game, you'd pick a color of
Right.
car to look for.
Right. Like a red car.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My brother was very sneaky, though. He didn't tell me later that in Florida, where we grew up, all rent-a-cars are white. And he would always pick white. And I, don't pick white. It's such a boring color. No, I'm going to go with white. And so he would always win the game. But it's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You start looking for blue cars, and you'll see some blue cars or red cars. And the same thing becomes true when we leave essence behind. Then we start looking for substitutes that make us
Out
feel
there.
that way out there. And sometimes sometimes it's addictions, sometimes it's painful relationship patterns. Instead of having sex, you have arguments. We call that having a wargasm. That couples that could be using that energy to have sex end up having the same length of time for an argument. And so it's usually the same energy. It's just we haven't learned to deal with the energy in that particular way yet. So go looking for essence inside yourself, particularly as a somatic thing, and also notice patterns that you do 3 or more times, things that you've done 3 or more times that haven't worked out. Those are your little crystallized patterns that as soon as you can shed some light on those and let those go, you get a burst of liberated creative energy as a result of letting go of those.
And we found that all of that is enhanced by focusing on appreciation. That's one of the, the least used and the most effective skills that we can develop, is to give our genuine attention to what's going on over here. So appreciation is about sensitive awareness first. It's not about, oh, you're doing great. It's really about, oh, I'm with you. I can see and feel what's going on, and I see you. And in that, it creates safety for more essence to come forth. And then also appreciation can be about the unique qualities of your partner, of your friend. And as we're appreciated more, that it begins to also help to shed roles that don't really work for us and that we might have gotten attention for, but it wasn't really satisfying. To have the exchange of, here I am as I am, and you can see and receive me. That is a huge opening where life energy starts to flow and creativity starts to replace, being defensive and getting over things, and then they repeat and recycle over and over again.
Sounds beautiful. I think we all could use a little bit more of that,
Or a
and
lot more.
a lot
you,
more.
you can
And,
start with a little, though. That works.
you guys have been doing this, I think you said before we got on, for 45 years strong.
Yep.
And I just want to say you're such an inspiration. It's so beautiful. And I am curious to ask, to finish this episode, where is your creativity taking you now? What's
Well,
next, or what are you working on?
well, I have 6 mystery novels in the pipeline that I've already written, and a memoir that I've already written that I'll need to be kind of getting out into the world over the next couple of years. So a lot of my creativity has gone into stuff that I've already done but needs things done to it. But I'm also in the stage of life in the ancient Indian system, going back thousands of years. They said life is four stages: child, student, householder, forest dweller. So when you get to my age, you become a forest dweller, where you spend a lot of time just appreciating nature. And I'm out in my backyard appreciating geckos and cats and things
Cats who are coming through. Yep.
And so a lot of my creativity is, I would say, free form at this stage.
Yeah, which is wonderful to interact with. And I've just launched, going to have a program next year for a whole year that my community is participating in. That's going to be called Cultivating New Stories for Humanity. And each month is going to focus on a skill, like, for example, being willing to be affected by the presence of other people, like letting people in, letting the world in. And so that program, I'm really intent on showing people and giving people the opportunity to invent really interesting new stories, because our old stories, our old stories are destroying the planet and us. And so it's time for new stories. And I remember at the convention, the Democratic convention, I remember Obama saying, "We need new stories." And I said, "Yes, we do." And I'm on it.
That's beautiful. Well, we'll make sure to link out to those programs, and as well as, I believe, over 30, I guess all 30 plus books you guys have created, many of which we discussed
As a
today.
matter of fact, we recently had occasion to count them up, and there's 51 of them. I didn't realize there's 51 of them if you count the mystery novels too. I've crossed paths with Connie Britton before. Are you related to her in any way?
I'm not, but I know who she is.
Okay. Thought you might be a long lost cousin or something.
That would be cool. Who knows? Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation, very inspiring. Thank you so much. And we'll be making sure to link out to your website and some of the specific resources we talked about. And I just wanted to express my sincere gratitude for taking the time for this. It's very beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, our pleasure.
Our pleasure. Many blessings to you. Have a good time. We'll talk again sometime.
Sounds good.
Be the